We've talked about diabetes on this show quite a bit, but I always think that it's worth, not only because we always have new listeners, it's always worth just asking a really basic question, because it is the seventh leading cause of death in the United States, and worldwide, it's one of the top 10 causes of death globally. So can you give us a definition of type 2 diabetes and differentiate it, please, from type 1 and type 3?
Great. That's a great question. And I love to start with that question. So diabetes is an umbrella term that basically defines chronically elevated blood sugar levels. Now inside that umbrella, you have different forms of diabetes, like you mentioned. We have type 1 diabetes, type 1.5 diabetes, we have pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and gestational diabetes. There's another one called type 3 diabetes nowadays, but that is more referring to Alzheimer's disease. Now, type 1 and type 1.5 are autoimmune forms of diabetes. That is when your immune cells are attacking the beta cells of the pancreas that produce insulin. And basically, the beta cells die off. You end up with no insulin, no more insulin production, and that in turn raises your blood sugar levels. That's autoimmune conditions. There is not really a lifestyle factor behind the development of type 1 or 1.5. Then you have prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, which, as you mentioned in the introduction, is the large majority of cases. Now, prediabetes and type 2 diabetes are lifestyle diseases. They come to fruition due to our lifestyle factors. Now, it's mostly diet and exercise. Now, unfortunately, we live in a society where we're eating too many calories and not exercising enough. And that is the driving factor behind the root cause of prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, which is known as insulin resistance. Now that has been said, you may be asking, okay, what is insulin resistance? What is this root cause? Well, insulin resistance, simply put, is when your cells are not responding properly to the signals of insulin. And insulin, just so everybody knows, is a hormone that acts like a key that opens the door of the cell so glucose can go into the cell. Now, if this key cannot open the door, you can just imagine what happens. Glucose cannot go into the cell, so it stays outside in the bloodstream. And that is the reason why when people living with prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, they check their blood sugar through a finger prick or through a CGM, their blood sugar is elevated because insulin never had the opportunity to open the door of the cell. Glucose never went into the cell, so it stayed circulating the bloodstream. And that is insulin resistance. Now, what causes it? That is when we get into the diet and into the lifestyle part of it, but we can dive into that a little bit later.
When we eat a surplus of calories, which is very easily done when we eat a diet that's mainly comprised of refined processed carbohydrates, added sugars, and animal products, which tend to contain a lot of saturated fat. When we eat these foods, they're very palatable, right? They're hyper palatable, and we can tend to consume too much of them, excess calories. And a lot of that time, excess calories leads to excess fat in our body, and it tends to develop in the abdominal area. It's called visceral fat. And that is highly linked to insulin resistance. And as Jose mentioned, insulin resistance is when insulin can't unlock the cells and glucose can't get into our cells. So glucose starts to build up, and over time that leads to prediabetes. And if nothing is done, then that continues. The glucose continues to rise to levels that then are categorized as type 2 diabetes.
Great explanations, both of you. Thank you. So in your book, The Type 2 Diabetes Revolution, and as I said, it's a cookbook and also a guide to help people manage diabetes or manage their life so that they don't get diabetes. You claim that you help the reader get to the root cause of the disease. Is the root cause that excess fat that you're talking about, or is it something else?
Well, the root cause starts with our lifestyle, the lifestyle that we're living. And in American society and now in Western society as a whole, we are living sedentary lifestyles, right? We're not expending enough calories, and we're eating hyperpalatable foods, like Diana mentioned, foods that are too high in refined carbohydrates, too high in saturated fats. And the combination of both of those forms of food makes it super easy to overeat calories. And that is what generates the problem. That is when we start having these tiny fat depositions inside of our muscle cells and inside of our liver cells. They are known as intrahepatocellular lipids in the liver and intramyocellular lipids in our muscles. That is what disrupts this insulin signaling at a cellular level. Now, everything stems from our habits, how much we move, what we eat, and so on. And that is why in our book, we tell people that when you switch to a plant-based whole food lifestyle, you naturally are eating no refined carbohydrates, and you're eating way less saturated fats and fats as a whole. And that is the premise behind the reversal of insulin resistance. When in combination, your entire dietary pattern is low in saturated fats and is high in whole complex carbohydrates that are high on fiber, antioxidants, water, minerals, vitamins, and all the goodness that we know that plant-based diets contain.
Right. We're going to definitely get into the food. I want to do a couple technical questions about how you say that a lot of people are living with pre-diabetes or diabetes and they don't even know it. How do we find out if we have diabetes or are pre-diabetic? And what is the A1C or the tool that we should be looking at to judge our status of whether we are pre-diabetic and diabetic? And I'm assuming, by the way, that pre-diabetic means, hey, you're a little too close to being diabetic. Is that right?
Exactly.
Okay.
So that's
how do we find out?
Yeah, that's such a great question and such an important thing to bring up, because diabetes can be a very silent disease. Like, it can go unnoticed for years, and it usually takes years to develop, and people don't realize that they have prediabetes or that they're on their way to type 2 diabetes. And that's why they actually did just reduce the age for screening. So it used to be 40 if you had a risk factor for type 2 diabetes. Now they reduced it to 35 because so many people are unaware that they have prediabetes, which again leads to type 2. And the best way to do it is to get your blood sugar checked, right? You could go to your doctor's office, you get your A1C, which is a test that measures the last 3 to 4 months. It's an average test of your blood sugar levels. Or it's very accessible. You can use a glucometer, and you can just do it at home and check your fasting blood sugar level, and you can have more or less of an idea of where your blood sugar is at. However, going to your doctor is going to be more of the standard of care. And so yeah, I would say definitely checking with your doctor to see where you're at, and that way, the sooner you can know, the better chances you have of reversing this illness.
And what's the number you want to be looking at for A1C? Like, I recommend people look at their most recent blood tests. And a lot of people don't save their blood tests. They just listen to their doctors. And I'm like, no, because doctors, their standards are too low for our health. They talk about normal, and normal is not good enough for in the United States of America. Normal means you're going to die of some preventable disease because you were too normal and you ate a normal diet.
Yeah.
So I recommend everybody go and look at their blood tests or get one if they don't have one. What's the A1C number they should be looking at? And do they need to ask their doctor specifically for this test, or does it come in a normal blood panel?
Yeah, so a normal A1C is going to be below 5.7. And then once you get into that pre-diabetes range, it's going to be 5.7 to 6.4%. And then diabetes is going to be 6.5% or above. And so you don't usually just get an A1C test, unfortunately, from your doctor. They usually check your fasting glucose levels. And if they notice something is abnormally high there or above the normal amount, then they will test your A1C to get more of a measure there.
Okay, so there's two numbers here. There's the A1C, which is a separate test, and then there's fasting glucose levels. What should we be looking at there?
For those who are interested and you don't want to wait until your next physical and you just want to go ahead and check your fasting blood glucose at home, you can do it with a glucometer that you just buy over the counter at a pharmacy. Now, the way to do it is you wake up in the morning, and the first thing that you do is you wash your hands, and before you walk the dog, before you make breakfast, check your fasting blood glucose. Now, the number, ideally, it should be below 100. Okay, that is for healthy levels. Now, you mentioned sometimes it's a little too late, right? When it's already 100, especially because the way that the medical system is set up in the United States, we take action when it's a little too late. So ideally, you should be looking at fasting blood glucose numbers between 80 to 90 or so. Okay, if it's less than that, it shouldn't go below 75 for fasting. Now, between 100 and 126, that is considered pre-diabetes. Okay, and 126 and above, that is considered type 2 diabetes. Now, the units of measurement that I'm using is milligrams per deciliter, because other people around the world use millimolars per liter. It changes, but right now I'm using what we use here in the United States. So what you should be focusing on is being below 100. And if you have 2 or more instances of 100 to 126, that is indications of prediabetes, and 126 and above, type 2 diabetes.
Okay, great. Can we go into some of the factors that contribute to somebody getting diabetes? You mentioned food and exercise. Are there any others like stress and sleep and things like that too? Or is it just basically food and exercise we should be concentrating on?
Yeah, there's quite a few different risk factors that, so like we mentioned before, food and physical inactivity. So food mainly being weight. So weight, being overweight or obese is one of the biggest risk factors. Then there's also that fat distribution. So that fat distribution more in your abdominal area, it puts you at a greater risk for diabetes. Of course, family history plays a role too. There is a genetic component for type 2 diabetes. But again, lifestyle really does pull the trigger. Your genetics can make you more at risk for it, but you can prevent it with lifestyle in many cases. Also, age is a really big risk factor. So the risk of type 2 diabetes increases with age, especially after 35 years old, which definitely shocks a lot of people. Of course, having prediabetes puts you at a greater risk. And then a big one too is gestational diabetes. So if you had gestational diabetes, if you had diabetes while you were pregnant, you are actually at a much greater risk of developing type 2 diabetes. So those are some of the common ones.
And just I want to add, the reason why the risk of type 2 diabetes increases as we age, it boils down to our body composition. As we age, we usually tend to lose muscle mass and gain fat mass. And that is what puts us at a greater risk of the development of type 2 diabetes. Now, like Diana mentioned, it is multifactorial. Insulin resistance is multifactorial. Multiple things are going to aim towards the development of insulin resistance, such as your diet, your movement patterns, your stress levels. There's a huge connection between how chronically stressed you are and your blood glucose levels, environmental factors. All of that definitely influences the development of insulin resistance.